Good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on your time zone. My name is Keith Clement, and we would like to welcome you to the ATARC Higher Education and Workforce Development Working Group. Our activities include the development of reports and white papers, including one that we are in the process of preparing on behalf of U.S. Congress that completes a variety of year-long study in cybersecurity education and workforce development. And so we welcome you to our meeting today. We have an all-star cast of key public sector and private sector and academia that have a variety of long experience and plenty of contributions to add to the mix. Again, my name is Keith Clement. I am a professor of criminology at California State University, Fresno. And we will be coming on camera, and I would like to introduce Patrick Slattery. Patrick, please come on and introduce yourself. And
Great.
then we'll go to Greg.
Thanks, Keith. As Keith mentioned, I'm Patrick Slattery. I'm a professor at Baruch College in New York. I've been teaching computer information systems and cybersecurity since a graduate level course that I taught at Fordham years ago. I was a board member on the New York Metro InfraGuard, which works with the FBI on cybersecurity, and for many years a partner at KPMG, where I worked with over 100 businesses. So I have a bit of a mix, Keith, of business perspective, cyber perspective, and computer science perspective.
Thanks, Patrick. Greg, would you like to come on and introduce yourself as well, please?
I'm Greg Cooper. I'm the ISSM on the government side and the ISOC, Information Security Operations Center manager for the Physical Science Laboratory at New Mexico State University. Do a lot of research here.
Thanks, Greg. And Jeff, how about yourself?
Yeah, very good. I'm Jeff Brown. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Connecticut. Before that, about 25 years in financial services, so public and private sector. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. I think it's going to be a good one.
Thanks a bunch all, and we really appreciate your time being here. For those that would like to introduce in the audience into the chat, please feel free to put your name, organization, institutional title, contact information, LinkedIn for those that travel heavily that way so that we can meet and introduce ourselves. So the first question is a vital question, given that there are 500,000 to 700,000 cybersecurity jobs currently available in the US. There are reported to be 3 to 5 million cybersecurity jobs open across the world. And ICS Squared recently put out a report that indicated that it's not just a cybersecurity job gap, but they also have a concern about a skills gap as well that could number as high as 4 million in the US alone if we look at all of these kinds of things. So our first question is kind of a intro question. What are the barriers and obstacles to filling the current cybersecurity capability gap? Jeff, we had you introduce yourself last. How about you go first with our first question?
Yeah, very good. And it's an important question to answer because really, I think as we look at the environment, the simple answer is that the problem is growing faster than the solution. We have a lot of focus on, just creating the next wave of security professionals. It takes some time to do that. At the same time, the attack footprint and the technical complexities of our world keep growing at an astronomical rate, right? Like, I mean, we have AI, we have all of this, technical legacy debt. We're putting everything on the internet now, from refrigerators to TVs to computers. And somebody has to secure all of that stuff. And I think that the resource constraints from companies, just the lack of people with specialized skills to do this, if you kind of think about it, you have to sort of learn IT before you can learn how to secure IT, right? So it's a long haul for some of these folks to come up to speed. And I think as hiring managers too, as a CISO, I need to be able to find people with all kinds of different backgrounds. I mean, we can take advantage of people who code, who communicate, so I think there's, the hiring side of things too, where we do have to make sure that we're looking at, diverse populations of people who can fill these jobs. Making sure that we're streamlining that hiring process, and then also really just making sure that we're training the next generation fast enough.
Fantastic. Patrick, what are your thoughts on the barriers and obstacles?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Jeff says. I'd say that the evolving threat landscape is big. I mean, look at AI. We've been especially in the last year, we've been seeing the impacts of AI in all sorts of areas. And we know it's a tool that the hackers, the folks who are trying to penetrate systems are making good use of, and we've got to get our talent trained up on it. Unfortunately, we then run into competition with other fields that are hiring. And so if there's a big pay gap or there's a lack of awareness in the talent and the recruitment pipeline, then students and young professionals are making their way into other fields to use these tools where we could use them. We certainly need them desperately in cybersecurity. I don't know, Jeff, if that aligns with your observations as well.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I think it's going to be it's a long struggle, I think, trying to get that next generation ready, as well as just making sure that we're making the most efficient use of the resources that we have, as well as training the people that we have, because things change so fast that, you can hire a great team and they can become out of date pretty quickly if you're not giving them the runway to train themselves in continuous learning.
And then long term, the entry-level jobs are the SOC analyst jobs, right? The detail-oriented jobs that require good technical understanding, network understanding. But if that's a stepping stone in a career path, we also need to be developing managers, right? Managers and business leaders. And the programs that we currently offer either turn out strong technologists or they turn out management candidates, right? And we're having trouble kind of putting the two together to fill this pipeline. Keith, are you seeing the same? I know in the task force, we've talked a good deal about a number of these things.
I got to tell you that the statistics are all over the map here. For example, because of the meteoric rise of cybersecurity across all of our lives and our organizations, that we have not yet seen the management supervisory function keep up with that. So we have management problems. We also not just have an entry-level issue. I did some recent research that suggested only about 15 to 20% of current cybersecurity job openings are entry-level. Many of them are actually intermediate or advanced level roles. One of the problems, a barrier or obstacle, is that only about 2/3 of our security teams are full at any one time. About a third of all jobs are open, which means that we're all on skeleton crews. The turnover and the burnout goes on at the entry level. A lot of folks never even make it to entry or into intermediate or advanced level roles. And Jeff, maybe have some insight here, but I heard that the average lifespan of a CISO at the job is about 12 to 18 months. So it's hard all over.
Yeah, no, that is exactly right. And I think it varies from industry to industry. I think we've seen recently with just the market being what it is right now, some firms laying off. You're seeing, I think the percentages were a high volume of CISOs considering new roles, but not necessarily jumping at new roles. So you might see a little bit of a leveling off at the moment. But I think in general, it's tough. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into, being successful at this job and really making sure, and I know that we're going to certainly talk about that a little bit more, like what do you need to succeed in these jobs, but trying to get people educated fast enough and get the workforce built up quicker than we're doing, I think, is really the goal.
And Greg, what's the New Mexico state? What are the obstacles and barriers from your perspective?
One of the ways we're tackling this is we're hiring a lot of students. We're trying to address 3 problems at the same time that is directly related to this. but it's not going to affect the middle management and the upper management. We like to bring in juniors and seniors in school and push them into the deep end. We just put them in the SOC that I run here, and they start learning. And so they start learning those skills and whether or not they like this, and whether or not they can work well with IT, and whether or not this is their job. And then it also offloads our full-timers to do things that are not as mundane, so we can shuffle off those tasks to the students. And then the third one is it reduces burnout, because we're not as constantly focused on every little aspect that we have to address. Every little attack, everyone that appears like it's an attack, how many attacks that occur on the firewall. We can push those ones that are more common off to the students, and then they're gaining an experience and seeing if they like it or not. And then we can reduce our burnout. So hopefully we stay longer than 18 months. So that's our current approach. We need more funding for students. That is one of the obstacles, more funding for students. I don't know if that'd be grants. We haven't figured that one out, but that's how we approach it.
A massive structural systemic issue that we're talking about here. You know, I think grants could probably ease some of the pain of the vast shortage that we have here. But I also know that many of the technologists out there believe that it is going to be automation that will be part of the key to resolving and reducing workforce gaps. Like, for example, the SIMs and all the various logs and the reports that we could take human eyes away from and have transformative AI assist in there. There is a pair of questions that we have in the Q&A. For those that have a question, please drop it into the Q&A. The first question that we have, why are there so few entry positions, and how do we increase the number? The reason why we have a relatively few entry-level positions available compared to the intermediate and the advanced level roles is that we have quite a pipeline or a pathway that leads into entry-level employment. The issue is one of retention and turnover, that if we bring lots of folks into the jobs and they only stick around for 12 to 18 months before they are overworked, and you know, problems with relationships and health problems and all of these things that go along with chronic stress of our security teams, I think that's part of the issue. And secondly is that they are moving these folks from entry-level roles into the intermediate level roles as fast as they can, right? That you know, if you stick around long enough, you're going to go straight to the top. And we are under the discussion these days of actually having CISOs on the boards of many corporations, right? So we are talking about the addition of a C-suite or executive level of positions. And Tom also had a question, panel's thoughts on when and where we can start preparing young people in the path to cyber skills. My response is absolutely as soon as humanly possible. I would actually believe that kindergarten, pre-K is the time to start getting them warmed up and identify those with talent that we can take advantage of and utilize and leverage folks that show skills in this area. Jeff, Patrick, Greg, any other comments to add here?
Yeah, I'll throw something in. One of the things that I look for is really just a level of curiosity. I think when you look at cybersecurity, not only do you have to understand how things work, but you have to understand how they break and how they don't work. You know, and that level of curiosity and that level of just deep understanding is something that will go a long way in an entry-level position, because you're going to have the sort of the staying power to last in the industry. I mean, you know, I can look back over even 5 years and just say, like, boy, what we knew 5 years ago is barely relevant, right? Like, I mean, you really need that level of curiosity, and also just the, you know, here's how it works, but how does it break? How does it not work? And that is the right mindset to be in security.
Patrick?
Yeah, I was going to say, to Jeff's point, detail-oriented, but curious to the point of being potentially dangerous, I guess, right? Dangerous, but on the blue team, not the red team. But I wanted to go back to, you know, the question about entry-level positions or the dearth of them. Is there may be a good number of hidden entry-level positions where the posting that you see online asks for 5 years experience and certifications, et cetera. And Keith, you and I were on a panel recently with some cybersecurity experts who said they find it best to work all those job postings, the CISOs, directly, because if it makes its way through HR, a lot of boilerplate ends up in the information that gets pushed out to ladders and all the various job sites, right? So I don't know for a candidate how you could sort of, snowplow or ice break your way through that, but there's a bit of dysfunction in that part of the pipeline, in the hiring process as well, and the requirements, right? There was a time where everyone had to have a bachelor's degree to be considered a potential hire, but we see that shaking loose as well, right? Greg, Jeff, what are your thoughts on both of those?
Yeah, it's definitely shaken loose. I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I do. This is an interesting subject for us because as the federal government moves more and more towards skills-based learning, the state is as well. I think private industry needs to as well. It's like, what kind of skills do you need, and what kind of like lifelong learners are you bringing in? Because what can happen there, entry level implies a certain lack of skill, right? Like, and it's bringing someone in who's going to kind of need a lot of overhead and things like that, like hand holding and training. Coming in with even a modicum of skills so that you're productive on day one just makes that whole proposition a little bit easier from the hiring employer's side. Coming in and being productive, and then like kind of sticking with a company and being able to grow, and obviously the company and yourself have to put education into that as well. But that's how we get productive faster, rather than kind of going through like a 4-year university or and universities absolutely have their place, right? Like I have a master's myself, but I do think that we have to be a little bit more big and broad in how we're thinking about the next generation of talent.
Greg.
We look a lot at certifications here, not necessarily bachelor's degrees, though we have it on our job posting. But we encourage anybody to apply because they have a shot. And my encouragement to others is have a thick skin, continue to apply, even though you may not make those because the competition is high, but continue to apply to those jobs and interview, even if you don't meet the minimum on paper. You will find a slot where you fit in well. And that's what we found here. We ask a lot of our people that come in what they do when they're interviewing, what they do in their spare time, and that has a lot of weight to us. If you are playing with routers and firewalls in your network at your house, that means a lot to us. You are experimenting with how things work at the low end, not just in what you learn in the classroom, and I think that's important.
Love it. Just so that we're clear, about 68% of current cybersecurity jobs require a 4-year degree, and that number is going down 1% or 2% each year. It used to be much higher than that, but it is definitely on the downward spiral. About 20 to 21% of cybersecurity jobs require master's degree level stuff. So, I mean, you add both of those together, we're talking 80 or 90% require some degree of higher education, with the understanding those numbers are changing and they're altering slightly, going down a little bit. And I think that many of us mentioned this idea of skills or demonstratable skills, whether they're done through certifications, whether they're done through volunteerism, whether they're done from a variety of different key factors, including work experience. So our second question is, what are the key competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for professional success in the cybersecurity field? I know many folks out there that do not believe that a 4-year or a 6-year degree is indicative of success or a prerequisite for success in this area. What do you all think? Patrick, what's on your mind?
Well, we've hit on being detail oriented and curious, right? Some sort of core, almost aspects of character or personal traits. But beyond that, you need to develop a good, solid understanding of security practices and procedures. Perhaps if you're interested in one of the other framework, ISO or NIST. And then, as Jeff mentioned at the start of our discussion today, you need a lot of strong technical skills, especially around networking, database applications. Those are the places that things are going to pop. If something's going to pop, if something's going to break, right? As Jeff said, and you need to understand that when it breaks, how does water get through the crack? I guess might be the way to explain it. When the vase cracks, how does the water get out, right? And your job is to kind of keep it from getting out of the vase. But also the common body of knowledge around practices and procedures and the maturity of different practices and being able to assess where an organization is relative to what the general population of organizations are doing on cybersecurity, the common body of knowledge, right? We see it sort of starting to percolate with CMMC in the defense sector. And I think, Jeff, you may have insights on this, but what I've been hearing for years now is that CMMC was beginning in the defense industrial base, but the intention was to start spreading that across industries, right? And perhaps make that a kind of certification standard equivalent to the ISO certification standard outside the US. Knowledge of all that, I think, is an important skill to have, whether you get that self-trained and through certification, demonstrated through certifications, or you're doing that through educational courses in a university, college, higher education environment. Jeff, Greg?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things to add to that. One, obviously the technical skills, we've talked about that, but sometimes also, especially at the more senior levels, soft skills, communication, teamwork, critical thinking, ultimately business acumen, like how well do you understand what you're securing? I think a lot of folks get into the industry and they think about either, in some cases, technology for technology's sake or security for security's sake. And really what we're there for is we're securing a business, or we're securing an entity or an enterprise or a government. That is the mission, not IT and not security, right? Like, unless you're a security vendor or a security company. So really understanding what your business is doing and being able to work together, and then also having that sort of distinction between skills and knowledge, right? Like, you go through school and you learn lots of knowledge, you go to work and you learn lots of hands-on skills. So the more you can get the hands-on skills part, knowledge will come with that. I think in some cases, maybe we do education a little bit backwards, or at least maybe we could do it more in parallel. We're working with UConn to be able to get students hands-on experience while they're in school learning. I think that's really probably the best way, because you're combining skills and knowledge together.
I'd tuck in, on those management skills, project management as well. And that's a good stepping stone.
Yeah, for sure.
When you're a junior level analyst and you start to get responsibility for a project, you get a budget, you get some milestone, timeline, deadlines, and all of those help you develop, I think, ultimately as a manager as well.
Every incident is a project, right? Greg, what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I teach three. This may be an oversimplification, but I teach three things that they need to get their head around: regulations, risk analysis, and incident response. If you get those three right, the rest of it will just fall out. You have to know your regulations, when you have to report, what they're expecting from you. You have to do your risk analysis so you can figure out what your vulnerabilities are, and then your incident response if something does go wrong, which it will at some point. But if you get those three right, I believe everything else just sort of falls in place through the risk analysis. And then you'll have a mission at that point. You'll know what your priorities are, what's the most vulnerable. I know that's an oversimplification, but that's how we teach it here. Well, that's how I personally teach it with my crew. And that's how I look at those. Those are the three most important, which some people may disagree with. And then I think everything else falls out.
I love that. I actually believe that more of our companies, agencies, organizations need to do a better job with cyber response planning on the front end, that they are exercising and training and drilling on, so that when things ultimately do go wrong, that we know the script, we know where to start, and that we've done this before in a non-high risk, non-high consequence situation. I hear many people refer to cybersecurity as consequence management, right? It's not cyber management, it's consequence management. How do we avoid significant financial loss? How do we avoid significant damage to our reputation that we seek to maintain? And the cost of a breach is not only tangible. About $9.6 million is the average cost of a breach. But what about the intangibles, like your customers leave because you're my insurance or my bank? You can't handle my data. I'm going to go with another company that is able to maintain our data. We did have a couple of questions from our audience here about what is the role of work or work experience in skills development. So Greg or others, I don't know if you have any thoughts on how important work experience is to getting a job in this field, and what should they be taking away from their position to leverage that further into their careers?
Patrick, Jeff, for me, it's I think it's critical. That's why we grab juniors and seniors and put them into the SOC right away, and then push them in the deep end and see how they adjust and how they manage that. That lets them know right away whether they like the field and whether they can handle the stress load. At the same time, they can now go, when they graduate, I say I'm in the business of training people to be very effective for somebody else, because we're a university. And then once they get those skills, they can go on and show, this is what I've done. And I think that's highly valuable. And that's what I want the physical science lab at New Mexico State University to be known for. We train good, knowledgeable people. So I think those skill sets, learning in real world environments, is critical. It's vastly, I can't overstate it.
We get some students, both undergraduate and graduate level, who get exposure to cybersecurity in a broader, either intro to information systems or say an IT strategy course. And I wouldn't say they get the bug right away, but it sort of raises it on, or brings it onto their radar, and a good number of them then start exploring it as a career opportunity and become successful at it. But so there's an awareness, there's a degree of awareness that helps with young talent as it's coming into the pipeline, for sure. As far as experience, when it comes down to getting hired, Jeff mentioned this earlier about having a home lab. We heard Keith in an earlier discussion, we heard you don't have to necessarily buy the equipment and tinker yourself a lot at home. You can do a good deal of it in the cloud with freemiums and all sorts of offerings from vendors. But construct something, right? Start, if you're not in an internship or you're not on a program that's got you working in a lab like the one you have, Greg, then do some things on your own in the cloud and at home, and start demonstrating that you understand how to break things and how to watch what's happening when it's happening.
The development of virtual machines and sandboxes so that you don't destroy your home or your work computer or network are examples of some of the kinds of skills that we would like to see folks develop, so that they can work and hone and polish their skills without breaking themselves in the process of going through all of this kind of stuff. Any last word from any of the panelists on question number 2, or are we ready to move on to the third? Fantastic. So one of the key problems in cyber and the security realm is the idea or the issue of the human error factor, right? About 90% of all breaches begin with some social experimentation. This is more of a people problem sometimes than a computing problem. And in addition to that, the critical role of information sharing amongst partners. We have the siloization that occurs that really prevents us from really learning the vulnerabilities that are out there. People are so busy protecting their own networks and their own systems that they fail to understand how their information and knowledge and experience can assist others that may be going through these same problems as well. So the question is, how do we get all key partners and stakeholders together to develop quality cybersecurity education and workforce development programs? Jeff, I would love to hear what the state of Connecticut is doing on these questions.
Yeah, and then what a great question too, because I think as we move forward, one of the things that we're realizing is that it doesn't matter how secure you are, it's your partners, it's your third parties, it's any number of things. And we have to worry about all of that stuff. So a lot of it is engagement strategies, making sure that people know what's out there. I can tell you in the state of Connecticut, we're doing a few things that are worthy of note here. One is called the whole of state security strategy, and most states are doing this right now. This isn't unique to Connecticut, but we are essentially getting a federal grant that we will be able to dedicate towards municipalities, local government, education, and really make sure that the local municipalities, like the state does okay with cybersecurity, right? But everything's centralized. Everything has we have a CISO, we have a security team, we have all of that stuff in place. But when you go into a town or a municipality, you might have an IT director, or you might have somebody who does IT part-time. You very likely do not have a CISO or anybody kind of dedicated to security. A few towns do, but many do not. And really just making sure that, we do some outreach. Like we actually just finished something called Cyber Nutmeg in Connecticut, where it's a public sector oriented. It comes through our partners at the Connecticut Education Network, or CEN. And that was something that one of the most actionable conferences I've seen. Like, take a picture of this, go sign up for that, like all this stuff that we can lean on with federal partners. For us, the multi-state ISAC, but we also have things like InfraGard, the FBI, and others. All of that stuff is really, I think, important. And also the Connecticut Cyber Hub, which is something that we are really putting together to educate the next generation. This is a public-private sector partnership. We actually have some corporate sponsors as well, Microsoft, Splunk, and some others. And this is really something that is intended to really take that skills-based learning, educate the next generation, really tapping into, community colleges, tapping into, just all kinds of areas that we wouldn't normally look for the next generation, and making sure that they have that opportunity. One of the things that came out of the national cybersecurity strategy essentially boils down to it's up to us and private sector and public sector to make sure that any able American who wants to pursue a job in cybersecurity is able to do that, right? And then in some cases, university education can be a roadblock for some. So we want to make sure that there's alternate paths as well.
Great, Patrick?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jeff, you mentioned the multi-state ISAC, and they're sort of co-located and kind of overlapping a bit with the CIS, or the Center for Internet Security. There's a lot of great information and tools there that you could take into say high schools or programs for younger students and get them some exposure.
And it's no cost, and it adds immediate value. And there's a large amount of free services that there's some low cost things that you can buy, but there's some free services that you can implement today. So if you're a town and municipality, definitely look into the multi-state ISAC. That's something you could do right now to actually make things better, right? That's an actionable item.
To me, the complexity is there's four legs of the table here. And the private sector has about 95% of the personnel. The public sector, about 5 or 6% of cybersecurity professionals are working for state and municipalities. We often talk about the role of academics, K-12 educators, college and university professors. There's a fourth leg of this table that has not gotten the attention that it's due. That is the community-based organizations, not-for-profits, CBOs, NFPs. And to me, when we are talking about collaboration and partnership, that we rely on all four legs of that table to make sure that we have a comprehensive and a holistic cybersecurity strategy. I think that one of the things about the cyber world is that it is a dynamic, quick-paced, fast-moving ecosystem. You know, today may not look at all like tomorrow. Who knows what's coming down the pike in 2 weeks? That it is essential that we have a lifelong culture of learning, right? I mean, if I had skills to defeat the 5 years ago threats and vulnerabilities, that's probably not going to help against some of these new ransomware gangs that are out doing their own thing. And all of this, of course, points to the issue of partnership and information sharing, the value. Any additional comments on question number 3 before we move on to the next one?
Yeah, I would bifurcate the 95% you talked about as corporate jobs. When I'm teaching IS students, I make it very clear to them that we often think of these corporate jobs as the big, Fortune 100 and the name brand companies. 70% of those, 70 to 80% of those IT jobs are in mid-sized to small businesses. And so that's almost another stepping stone or extension of build a home lab or do some things in the cloud. Perhaps, maybe you don't see it as the way to make a living for the rest of your life, but perhaps engage with a small business and help them with they're never going to go out and or have the money to go out and hire a whole slew of cyber experts to give them coaching. But if you do it pro bono or you do it for some nominal charge, that's great to have in your portfolio when you're going for a job interview. And you get a reference. You do a good job at it. You get a nice reference out of it.
60% of small and medium-sized businesses that suffer a breach are out of business within 6 months. That is the same figure for small and medium businesses that suffer a natural disaster like an earthquake or a hurricane or whatever. That is 60% of these companies. They never get back on their feet as a result of these breaches. And many of the Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies have extensive security operations teams. In many cases, small and medium-sized businesses could actually have a 50-50 IT cyber position. It's the same person installing the printers and the firewalls as it is doing the vulnerability patches and all the other things. So they are under-resourced and overworked. And we could always talk about what happens on the Friday afternoon of a 3-day weekend. The dread of the security team Friday at 4:45 is when the incident goes down, as they say, and we need to do a better job of getting the information shared and across the groups. Our fourth question, what does the future hold, right? Looking into our crystal balls here, what does the future hold for cybersecurity education and workforce development? What strategies can we utilize to improve things into the future? Greg, would you like to go first?
Something we're working on that I'm experimenting with, I call it network adjacent. We're taking our backups that are occurring and we're moving those offline. That server comes up for a certain period of time at a certain day. It does a backup and then that backup is moved completely offline. Is one of the things we're experimenting with. And then we're also talking about how could we do that with our data as well, not just backups, but if you have critical data, like at a hospital, I don't have the fortune yet to working with the hospital, but I'd like to experiment with this. If you moved that patient data offline or made it network adjacent, it takes a little more work to get to it, but it would be way more secure. So I think one of our pitfalls is that it's a constant mantra of convenience, convenience, convenience. Everybody needs all the data all the time. And I think we need to move away from that and start figuring out how do we put more layers in. More layers are better. It would impact convenience And then you'd have to have like data diodes where data can move one way, but not the other. But I think there's a lot of experimentation that we need to do. And that's one thing we're playing with right now. And I just call that network adjacent.
Air gapping as it is, right?
It's online. It's not a complete air gap. It's online, but it's either one way or there is another mechanical step that has to happen. But like you may have to be on a particular machine to move the data. Not everyone can access the data all the time. So it's not completely an air gap, but it's close. It was taken from the ideas of an air gap.
Greg, I have to put you in touch with a hospital in San Jose, Costa Rica, where they got into very aggressive segmentation with the new CISO and did a really good job of it. You get to peek at the hospital then.
That'd be fantastic. I'd like to see how other people are implementing. I'm sure they're doing a great job. If they're doing that, they're already moving down the right path, in my opinion.
Right.
Interesting. So Patrick, what does your crystal ball say?
Well, we've talked about practical experience. I think we really need to bake that into in the higher education space. We need to bake that into the curriculum and the training that we do, and more cross collaboration and integration. We heard, Keith, you and I heard from someone who was a CISO at one of the big 4 US banks, who made the comment that it's easier to teach a business person technology than to teach a technologist the nuances of business. Not the basics, but the nuances, right? I don't know if I buy that. I think we can sort of grow cross-disciplinary talent if we do it right. If we start earlier and we do it right. And then, as Jeff was pointing out, these public-private partnerships, they're critical. There's really good research and development. There's really good innovation going on in both worlds, and we need to put them together. We need to do a better job of putting them together. They're not antagonists in this space, right? We're on the same team.
Love it. Jeff, y'all in Connecticut are doing an awful lot in this area. What does your crystal ball say?
Yeah, well, I think a couple things, and first of all, I do think you can teach IT people about business. We just have to simplify it and talk in their language a little bit more. There's a cross communication problem, I think, with IT people and business leaders, and it's more communication than concepts. I think business is actually relatively straightforward, and until you actually run like your own business, you start realizing like everything is overhead, everything is an expense, and that includes cybersecurity. Suddenly when you run a business, it's crystal clear, and when we're in security, we don't always see that. So a couple things in the future too. I think automation, just the attacks are happening so fast and they happen in parallel, and there's just so little time to respond to things that automation is going to play a huge part in that future. As will AI, and I think the two go hand in hand. And I think in cybersecurity, we can't shy away from this kind of technology. Sure, it has some problems. Sure, there's definitely things to worry about. But I can tell you right now, people are already training AI on writing better phishes, better malware. We already have cybersecurity software that does it on the defender side, right? Like that helps us make decisions in faster, in real time, and being able to flag things. Imagine being able to just hire somebody, to be a SOC analyst and being able to ask, simple English questions like what suspicious happened from this IP address in the last 24 hours across all systems, right? Just a very simple English question that normally would take some coding and some skills to be able to do. On the strategy side, the one thing I would say is that no matter what industry you're in, there is probably an ISAC, an information sharing center. There in financial services, there's the FS ISAC. We already talked about the multi-state ISAC, but there's retail, energy. There's so many. In fact, today's election day, there's an election infrastructure ISAC. There's just so many things out there. And I think that collaboration, not just on the national level, but also the international level is going to be important with this. We just saw 40 countries agreeing not to pay ransomware anymore. We'll see how that actually works. But in principle, that's great because they're talking, right? Like even just that they've sort of agreed to that in principle is an amazing step forward. You know, even in the US, like federal government, state government, even within the federal government, there's a lot of silos. You know, so it's that communication barrier needs to be better. We need to get rid of it and just be able to communicate a lot better across different companies and just making sure we're sharing threat intelligence, you know, tactics, tools, stuff that we should be looking for. And then automating as much of that as we can into our cybersecurity software so that it actually can detect that stuff in real time.
I love it. I guess related to the future of cybersecurity is the role of AI specifically within cyber. So is AI a transformative, positive development for cybersecurity? Or would you suspect that AI is more of a disruptive technology in terms of security? And any thoughts on how that's going to change the future of the field?
Can it be both?
Absolutely.
I go both, right? I think
It is
in a way,
both.
yeah, it is. I think one of the big benefits for us in cyber will be people will need to spend less time actually developing code and configuring things, and more time either thinking the logic through and developing prompts for the AI, and then thinking about the outcome and testing, right? And those are the places where the, you know, the person who likes solving puzzles really excels, right? They're just knocking out some code that does something for you. Why not have some tool do that for us, right?
I think it's both, and the way I think it's going to work out is it's going to be disastrous on the attack side, and it's going to be very effective. And then we're going to start implementing it more on our side, on the defense side, and we'll have to play catch up. That's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to make our lives miserable for maybe a decade until we catch up. I mean, that may be a little far. But it depends on how much damage they do until then, and then we'll try to catch up when that happens.
Greg, do you have any thoughts? I think that I'm sorry.
Were you directing to Jeff? Because Greg just finished. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I'll throw in a couple of quick thoughts on that subject. You know, one thing AI is just tremendous at is just going through tons and tons of data and detecting the needle in the haystack, right? And you can have a person do that, yes, you know, but it's tedious, it's prone to error. You know, the fact that AI is prone to error too, that's fine, right? Like, so is the human, and the human's probably a lot more error prone than some of the AI stuff, especially when we're talking about like gigabytes of data that we're now starting to, and you have to think about it, like an attack looks very simple, right? Like, I mean, some attacks are very clearly attacks. When we start getting into a little more subtle areas like insider threats and fraud looks exactly like a good transaction, right? Like a transaction happened, it was accepted, it was fraudulent though, right? So trying to understand some of those very subtle differences and do it at scale, because now everything's done over the internet. So we have so many transactions all at once. Having a person try to parse through all of that stuff and be able to see, oh, this looks a little suspicious to me. You won't be able to do that at scale or at speed, and we need to do both. We need to do it at scale and at speed, and I think that's where AI really shines.
Fantastic.
Jeff, if you think about in data science and machine learning, the parts of the organization that are involved in machine learning, they're pumping a lot of data in and out, and they're not doing it in any sort of regular pattern, right? So a lot of our monitoring techniques would consider that activity anomalies and kick out an alert. And so what we do is we sort of fence it in and say, no, that's the data science group. You know, we're not going to chase every alert that pops out of that part of the network. But if we had an AI tool that was monitoring it, it could deal with that level of complexity and understand, even with all the variability in the activity that goes on there, when there truly is something that looks suspicious. Right.
Yeah.
And this goes to Greg's point that, you know, the AI will probably cause us a lot more pain before we figure out how to use it to make
No
our
doubt.
lives.
And that would be a fantastic use of it, right? In my line of work where I'm at, I'm involved in a lot of different activities, and I could walk down the hall with this monstrosity on my head and look very suspicious, but nobody would bother me. They would say, "Oh, that's Greg running an experiment." But maybe that isn't. Then maybe that is an anomaly. Maybe I'm misbehaving. And that's where AI would be really efficient is what is Greg's baseline behavior? And because we do look a lot of these groups, and if you do get an insider threat, and that's what keeps me up at night is insider threats. People that have keys to the kingdom, they have the crown jewels, and then how do we detect them? And I don't have a good answer for that. And I'm hoping at some point we can have some good AI tools that can baseline people's behavior and then alert the SOC when there is a deviance from that. I don't know what to call it, but when there's a change in that.
An anomaly, right? Yeah, an
anomaly,
anomaly in a
right.
sea of anomalies, right? This
Right,
anomaly looks way different than all these other anomalies.
And then yeah, and that's it, an anomaly of a group of anomalies, and then have a human look at that, and then that's when a human can go, okay, that does seem a little bit odd for this person, so I may need to go talk to them or talk to people around them, and that's where the human comes in. And so I think both are needed, and I think it's going to be ugly until we get there.
Nothing but good news there, right? Well, one thing is that the students are outpacing the faculty in the utilization of AI and tools. Red team appears to be showing some distance across the blue teams, and so we definitely need to be less reactive and a little bit more proactive in a lot of these things. But we do have a couple of questions from our distinguished participants, including one about what certs are recommended for entry-level employment. I don't know if you have any thoughts on what you would, if you're providing your student guidance counselor hat on, what would be the entry-level certifications that you would recommend for folks that are trying to get into the field?
I could jump in quick.
Yeah.
First of all, I would say, look, a lot of people, they think go right for CISSP, but the reality is there's a work experience that comes along with that. Other people sometimes think like I'm going to get a cert and that's going to get me a job guaranteed. That's also not a guarantee. I would certainly look at ISC squared, which does CISSP, which is sort of that certified information security professional. That's kind of the big name in the industry, but you can't go for that as entry level. They do now have something called certified in cybersecurity, CC, and it is intended to be that entry level exam, and it also kind of gives a stepping stone to CISSP. I would probably think about that. Security Plus comes up a lot. I don't think that there's a lot of entry level requirements for that either. But those are two good starting points from my perspective.
And the other one that ISC squared offers is the SSCP, which is sort of a subset of the CISSP question set. I think it has a 2-year work experience, but again, you could just sit and pass the exam and demonstrate that you at least passed the exam. Cloud, I think for young people, something. Oh, go ahead, Greg. I was going to say.
Oh, no, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Something that demonstrates capability in the cloud. You know, whether you go vendor specific or something more general, but some demonstration of skill with cloud.
For a lot of our customers, Security Plus goes a long way with the ones that we're working with. They like to focus on Security Plus on the front end, and then as you get work experience, move to the CISSP, and that's what I train my guys to focus on, is start with Security Plus and then work your way to CISSP if you want a career in this. And a lot of them find out they don't. I find it very interesting how many ISOC students come in and work in my department and then move over to the IT department, and vice versa. They start on the IT, but they prefer the back end once they start doing IT. I find that very interesting, but I think it's all good.
And then I might also tuck in for students or people who are transitioning careers and perhaps not as technically focused, they might think of an ISACA certification and getting more into governance or attestation or the policy, procedure, and business side of it.
Tom wants to know, he is inquiring about how important are hands-on skill building, home labs, projects versus certifications. Any thoughts on how important are the actual hands-on skill building as opposed to the certifications?
Yeah, I think that goes right back to skills versus knowledge, and they both have a place, right? Like your knowledge is what you know, skills is what you can do. And I think that both are important. If you don't understand some of the concepts behind skills, then you're probably a candidate for automation. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. But I mean, like on the other hand, when you sort of know a lot of things, but you don't really know, I can read a book on how to drive a car, but until I actually get behind the wheel, I'm not going to know a thing, right? Like, so, the good news is we are in an age now where you could take classes from MIT and Harvard for free online. There's just amazing resources out there. There's hands-on labs in the Microsoft cloud, in the AWS cloud. I mean, you could set up virtual machines, you could set up virtual networks and just bang away on it, get some of that hands-on experience. I think both are important though, because a lot of times things don't really work the way it does in the textbooks, right? Things don't always work that way in the real world.
I completely agree with Jeff. I think you should have hands-on. I think you should play with the home labs, and then go for your certifications. That'll actually help you get the certification because you'll understand the questions and the answers. But if here at PSL, if you have a lot of knowledge, that helps, and you can demonstrate that. And then if you have certifications on top of that, you will be head and shoulders above others, because you have the cert, which means you can take the test and you understand what's going on in the background, but you've also proven it out because you've done it at the lab, whether a home lab or a lab we give you here. So I think they're equally important. It's tough to say one's above the other.
Thanks, everyone. How about this? Paid internships, yay or nay? Are they valuable, or are they not as valued as some people may think that they are? Any thoughts?
Can I start? So if anyone in the audience currently has a paid internship that they don't think is of value, call me, please. I'll have a student take your spot immediately.
Absolutely correct. Yes, sir.
I'll
Jeff,
jump in there too. I would say that, first of all, paid internships are the way to go. We're still struggling in the state to make sure that it's a paid internship. We have managed to take in a few interns unpaid, and I hate doing it that way. I don't think it's fair, and we are trying to establish a better program. But really, that's where you get sort of that hands-on experience. I mean, in fact, one of the things that we're talking about with CEN, which is a partnership with UConn, we might ultimately be able to set up a state security operations center where you go to class and you do all of that learning, and then later on you're actually hands-on managing the state security operations center. For the state of Connecticut, right? Like, that's a pretty big deal. Imagine going through coursework, doing that, and having hands-on experience like managing state government. You're ready for the job force in a big way by that time. And also it gives you a flavor for just what it is like being in a job, and what that next step may be. Some people do choose to move into different directions. Like, we've seen a lot of people even in other majors who just want to learn more about cybersecurity, which is also very interesting. We've seen like accounting majors who want to take some cyber courses just so that they sort of understand, like, when we talk about cybersecurity, what is it? It's just such a big subject now.
I think it's huge to have the paid internships. As a matter of fact, here at PSL, we brought in 2 high school students that are seniors at high school here in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and they're actually doing work with us when they can, half day every once in a while. So they're getting a way head start above the college students. And I find that extremely valuable. And I hope they do too. I think paid internships is the way to go.
Love it. Jeff, Patrick, Greg, Elizabeth, thank you all so much for being here and providing your guidance, knowledge, and wisdom to those that joined us today in the very critical area of cybersecurity education and workforce development. To our participants, I certainly hope that you found this insight to be helpful and of value and useful. I do believe that many of us are found on LinkedIn, and I presume that you could probably find our email addresses with a little bit of sleuthing out there. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you again at a future ATARC presentation. And thank you very much for joining us today.